Do you like Beamers? Do you like Benz? Which do you think depreciates worse? What is a better investment? Stick around, guys. We're going to talk about it. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Mark with exoticcarplayplace. And today, so the question about buying a car that's got some value and doesn't suffer extreme depreciation is always a question when you're looking at some of the great German brands like Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, Mercedes-Benz, BMW. All great brands, but there are some very specific models that really suffer depreciation badly and other ones that really hold their value quite well. Of all the brands, today we're going to talk about the Benz and the Beamers. And so I'm going to qualify this discussion today about discussing vehicles that are between 4 and 5 years of age, so they've already seen a large amount of depreciation. As well, we're going to compare premium cars, sports cars, flagships, entry-level cars, as well as the small SUVs. They're all going to be included, and we're going to do some comparisons about specific models between BMWs and Mercedes. And how do I qualify all this? Well, I qualify it essentially by picking a whole host of vehicles of the same model year between Benz and BMW. They're all going to be somewhere between 30 and 50,000 miles. And so I vigorously scoured the local classifieds as well as the national classifieds ads, such as through theautotrader.com and a lot of other localized classifieds to verify that. Now, these vehicles were always similarly equipped. So between BMW and Mercedes, for example, turbocharged powertrains, similar horsepower outputs, similar classification and size of vehicles. Did they have all-wheel drive? Similar trim levels? I mean, we didn't compare a premium car to an entry-level car. We took the very similar comparable vehicle from both brands, compared them, looked at the new MSRP price, and it compared it to each one of their own depreciated price of the same year. And then we were able to do a comparison on the percentage of retention or the value retention. So we're going to run some numbers for you, and I'm going to give you some great examples. So let's talk about some of this. So the first comparison, we're going to talk about sort of the entry-level SUVs. Now, on the BMW side, we are looking at a 2014 BMW X3 28i. Now, new, these vehicles had an MSRP of about $40,000 even. And now, of course, looking at them, they are found all over the trader with reasonable miles, as I said, in that 30 to 50,000 mile range for about $18,000 on average. Some are less, some are a little bit more, but that's roughly the value. Now, what is the retention value or the retained value of that vehicle? So we look at MSRP, divide that by the actual current value as a 2014 model year here in 2019, and we have a resulting value of 45%. But let's compare that to a Benz version of a similar vehicle. How about the GLK 350? A little bit more truck-like, a little less sleek, but it also had a much lower new MSRP price of $28,000 US. Now, these 2014 model years can also be found for around $17,000, $18,000 currently today. So if you run the math, you'll notice it's a 61% retention value. What does that really mean? That means that even though they're currently similarly priced in the used market today between the 28i X3 and the GLK 350, the MSRP new was much more expensive with the BMW. Is the BMW that much better or that much worse? No, I don't think it is. I think these vehicles are both similarly equipped. I do, in fact, think the BMW is actually a nicer vehicle than the GLK, and I think it's actually slightly better built. The problem is they were grossly overpriced. And the BMW is over $10,000 more as a new car than the GLK Benz, which was a similarly equipped, similar size SUV. So therefore, there was far less value buying the BMW new. So the second comparison that we do is on a premium sports sedan. So we're going to compare a 2016 BMW M5, which is the F10, that comes either equipped with a 6-speed manual gearbox or a double clutch transmission, and it produces 560 horsepower out of its twin turbo V8 engine. The Benz, on the other hand, is an E63 AMG that comes equipped with a 577 horsepower twin turbo. And as well, this car here now actually has all-wheel drive, so there's a little bit of a difference with the Benz. And comparing the dollars and cents, the BMW retailed new for about $96,000 US. While they can be found all over the marketplace today in that low mileage range for about 52 grand US. In the meantime, the Benz was about $94,000 new US dollars, and now you can find them all over the place for about $60,000 as a 2016 today in 2019. So the retained value of the Beamer is about 54%, and the Benz is about 63%. So in this case, the Benz also holds a higher resale and therefore suffers less depreciation than the BMW. Now, why might that be? Well, I'll tell you why that is. Now, unfortunately, BMWs are great cars, but the 5 Series have always sort of suffered from heavier depreciation, as is the 7 Series versions too. Now, being an M5, it's always a little exclusive, and there's always a lot of lovers of that car. But the AMG just does things a lot better. The AMG, in this case, coddles the driver. The interior is far more luxurious in the AMG. Not to mention it's got all-wheel drive system, more horsepower, enough power to really lay down 2 black strips as you take off. And it actually handles better. It actually is more confidence inspiring in the corners, believe it or not, than the BMW. The BMW can do everything in terms of the numbers game on paper, whether it's lateral G's or handling capabilities. It can do all the same things the AMG can. It just doesn't inspire as much confidence as the AMG car. The AMG does it. There's better sounds coming out of the exhaust on the AMG. It's more reliable, it's more luxurious, and quite frankly, it's a nicer car and a nicer package all the way around. Now, the third choice happens to be a 2015 BMW 335i, and compared that to the Mercedes C340, which is a very comparably powered vehicle. Now, the BMW, when it was new, was about $45,800 MSRP. And now you can find them used all over the place for a 2015 model year for about $28,000. So that yields about a 61% retention value on that car. So in essence, it holds very strong value, the 335. Now the Benz, on the other hand, the C340, was a lot more money actually when it was new. Even though it was a very similarly equipped as the Beamer, it was actually retailed for just under $50,000, and now they can be found for about $25K with similar mileage as you'd find on that 335i. So that ultimately results in about a 51% retention value. So compare the 51% for the Benz and the 61% for the Beamer. That tells me a totally different story. And the best that I can conclude with the fact that that is the situation is that the 335s are more conducive to tuners. There's no secret that the wonderful N54 and N55 now are becoming tuner specials in the German world. Whereas the Benzes are more, left conservative, and they're more stock. You don't hear a lot of people tuning those engines. The Beamers are more tunable, they appeal more to the youthful market, and therefore the market retail value of a used car tends to drive up, while the Benz suffers its natural depreciation curve. This case, the BMW holds a better value. So then we move on to the fourth example, and we're talking about a BMW 750i xDrive. We have to compare with the all-wheel drive version because we're going to compare that to the Mercedes S550, which happens to be similarly equipped. Now, they had about a $98,000 MSRP when it was new, and to be honest, they suffer depreciation. They fall like a stone. And now you can find a lot of them in a 2014 model year for about 30 grand. Now, if you do the calculations, quick number crunching, you'll find that it's only good for about a 31% retention value, which really hurts. That's huge depreciation on the premium. This is the flagship car, really, by BMW. Now, the Benz, on the other hand, was very expensive at about $100,000 US when it was new, and a 2014 model year today is worth about $39,000. So the ultimate yield on that is about 39% retention value on the Benz, which means that it's got almost a 10% higher value or retention rate than the BMW. And to be honest, a lot of that has to do with BMW's reputation for the premium 7 Series cars. The people that buy the 7 Series cars are typically the high-end executives. They lease them, they buy them new, but nobody wants those used because they're so expensive to maintain, they're very complex, and unfortunately they've got a really bad reliability record, or they have in certain model years. Certain versions were a lot worse than others, of course, particularly around the Bangle era. That was just notoriously unreliable. But they are just undesirable by the youth. Younger people don't want those. The older executives aren't going to buy them used. So who's buying those cars? Very few people want the used 7 Series, and therefore it suffers a serious depreciation. Now the Benz, on the other hand, you could argue similar situation. The only thing is the Mercedes S550 is actually a nicer packaged car. It looks a little more contemporary, and to be honest with you, it's just a prettier packaging, better interior, slightly more reliable than the BMW 7 Series, and therefore its value holds a little stronger than the BMW. So the fifth example of Benz versus Beamer happens to go to the BMW 2014 328i. And we're going to compare that to a 2014 Mercedes CLA 250. So are they both great vehicles? Yeah, they are both great vehicles, and they're both more or less entry levels of each brand for that sort of, not the subcompact, but certainly the smaller cars and more of the entry-level drivetrains associated with them. Now the BMW 328 new MSRP price was about $37,300. And now you can find those 2014s for about $14,000. So that yields about a 38% retention value on the Beamer. On the Benz, on the other hand, the CLA 250, they were new about $30,800. And now you can find them in the used market for about 16 grand. And that means they hold a value of about 52% of their original MSRP, which is drastically better than the BMW. Now you ask yourself, why would that be? Well, firstly, there's one thing I don't really care about the Benz, and that you cannot get in the North American market a manual transmission with the CLA 250, whereas you can get it in the BMW. So that's one thing going for the BMW. But what makes the BMW suffer a higher depreciation is that, in my opinion, the BMW look, the design, the chassis design, and the look overall of that car is starting to become a little dated. It's a little long in the tooth. Now Mercedes, on the other hand, with the CLA models and the 250, is a much, much fresher design. If you went a couple years prior, you'd be looking at the older style Benzes, and they were quite blasé as well. But because Mercedes stepped up and redesigned the whole chassis, the whole look of that car, it looks vastly better, much fresher than the BMW, and quite frankly, much more desirable as an overall packaging than the BMW. Like I said, the only thing for me disappointing is that you cannot get a manual gearbox in the Benz. So at the end of the day, which one really is the better brand? And which is the better brand in terms of depreciation? Overall, reviewing different models from, entry-level SUVs to entry-level cars to premium cars, flagships, sporty vehicles, we looked at a sample of each one. Same year, similarly equipped, similar horsepower outputs, and it looks as though Mercedes, overall, for the majority of the cases, has a better retained value from new. So in other words, it depreciates at a slower rate than most BMWs of their similarly equipped counterparts. Why is that? Well, I think Mercedes has done a lot of great things in the last few years overall. A lot of their new models are fresher. They have a lot very interesting drivetrains. And honestly, the overall packaging is particularly interior of these cars, which is where a driver spends a large part of their time. When a driver samples a car and they get in, the Mercedes honestly does a better job of exuding luxury, and it gives you a sense of coddled, and it makes you feel like you're in a much nicer, more comfortable place. And the BMWs, we know, are already more ergonomically correct. They work well. Everything's placed where it should be, and it's very functional. But in the sense of just the comfort and the perceived value of the comfort and the solidity of the Benz brand, it is a motivator, in my opinion, to buy the Benz as a used car purchase over some of the BMWs. Does that make it a better car overall? We're not talking about that today. The depreciation is reduced buying a Benz over a BMW, and those are my reasons. So I hope you enjoyed that summary. Thanks a lot, guys, for sticking around. Really appreciate it. Make sure you give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell. Love to see you in the next video. Hope to see you soon. Catch you then, guys. Bye-bye.